What's up? All right. Just give me 1 second. Just clicking a few things and setting up. Okay. So today I'm going to keep going on what I started on Wednesday, which was what we're seeing here as a Figma file, as a design file, which is a redesign of my personal, I don't know what you even call it. It's like my company that I do everything under. It's my umbrella company, my LLC that I run no code lists under. I used to be the name of my consultancy, which I don't really do anymore, and a bunch of other projects. So because it was a totally incorrect website that was talking about me, building a website for your company, now I'm rebuilding it as this, which is gonna showcase this live stream, showcase some writing, which I plan to start up again. I used to write all the time and I never do anymore. And then show my active projects and past projects, and kind of like a way, I have like a million, ghost projects, like dead projects that are inactive, but I would love to just have them somewhere. So anyway, that's what I'm doing. And so last 2 days ago on Wednesday, I got about this far. And so you can see I got basically the first 2 sections are in, with maybe they'll need some tweaks, like this is a little weird and stuff, but it looks a lot like this design. And so I'll just keep going today. But the difference today is last time I did a lot of dropping elements and styling them, which I'll still have to do, but today I'm going to add a data collection for the projects. And so I can go over a few things there and show how to display collections in a list, that kind of thing. So should be cool. And I started designing kind of like single page view for the projects, but I didn't get very far. So I'll probably, for today, stick to these lists. I'm going to skip the blog for now because I'm still not sure what I'm going to do, but I had this idea that maybe next live stream, I'll spend the whole time creating a universal blog pattern. And then the stream after that, I can just import that pattern and use it on this project. That'd be cool because then everyone can use the blog pattern. And that was one of my hesitations too, is building it in here. I was like, I know I need to make this pattern. I should just build it as a pattern first. So that might make sense. But anyway, for today, let's start on these active projects. Oh, and I did actually want to do one quick side note. I have this website for the live streams, which by the way is live.workandwhistle.co. But I put a button on here. Like right now it says I'm not currently live because this was already loaded, but it should read if I'm live. And I have never checked it. It doesn't work. Interesting. Anyway, I'll fix that. But that's kind of a cool feature, I thought. Like with the Twitch API, you can just check if someone's currently live or not. And then in Builder, just do a conditional. Display a button that's green that says watch live now, or display that grayed out button that says I'm not currently live. But I'll fix that later. For today, let's pop back into Builder. And so I've got a home page, and these are collapsed right now. So it's really easy to see. There's 2 sections. There's this intro section with the logo, and then there's this live section. And inside of each section, I have a container that sets a max width on it. And then I have a left column for that gray bar, a center column for the content, and then a right column for like an action button. It can be whatever, for this section, or it doesn't have to have one. And then for responsive design, we just kind of did this enough last time to where it works, to where those left side gray bar will turn into a full horizontal width section, like a header. So to start, I'm going to add another section, and I'm just going to come into this one that exists and duplicate it. And so now I've got, this section, and I need the section, I need the container, and I need the containers for these left, right, center. So that's all great, but I can go in and I can start changing this. So I'm going to skip the blog section for now and just start in on this active project section. So over here, I can just type active projects. And then in this center section, because I'm going to do something completely different, I'm just going to delete these out. And right now there's no action button, so I don't need that either. So what I'm going to put in this center section is a list of logos for the projects, and they have a name underneath them. But instead of dropping an image on, uploading my image, dropping text on, typing the text, I want this to be dynamic. I want to pull this from a collection. Sorry if you hear my dog barking. He's very loud. So what I'll do first is actually create the data collection that's going to house that information. For today, maybe I'll do like a quick version and just add a logo field and a name field. And then I'm going to build my own little admin for that. So that in the future, when I want to upload projects, it's super easy. I can type in a URL, I can upload, or I can, choose the picture, type in the name and whatever else I need to do. Hit publish or hit, save, because it's my admin I'm making, and then it'll go live on the site. If I did it without being dynamic, I'd actually have to drag the elements on or copy them over, change them to what I want, and then hit publish and publish my full site live. And one benefit of not doing it that way is if I'm in the middle of making changes on my site and I don't want to publish it all live, I can actually just go to this admin I'm creating. So long way to say I'm going to create a quick little admin. But first thing we'll do is we'll come into data collections. And by default, I've got a users collection that comes with every builder project. But I'll hit new collection, and this, I think what I'm going to do is do one collection that's called projects, and then I'll put a type field for if it's an active project, a past project, and I think I might actually even do kind of like future projects on here too, like stuff I'm considering. But I'll store that all in one collection called projects. So we'll create it. And then these properties, you don't have to change any of these if you're building and you want to go quickly, but they are for security basically. So for example, I do want to allow non-authenticated users to get these records, to read them so people can see my projects, but I do not want non-authenticated users to be able to create records or modify records. So I can turn that off. For example, and like user restrictions is a whole other thing. I won't go into it today, but you can actually restrict data collections based on who created them and if they invite other people to view those, etc. So it creates like some really good kind of, I guess you'd call it security, but just really good flows around not showing data to the people that shouldn't see certain data. In this case, it's my personal site and none of this data is hidden or sensitive at all, really. So I'm just going to create it all in the open. So here's my, I'm on the projects collection. Here's my fields list. And every collection in Builder has some default fields that get updated for each record when things happen. So created by, if I'm signed in as an end user to my project, not if I'm signed into Builder, but if I'm running a preview of my project and I'm signed into it because I made an auth system, any record that I create as a user will save my ID as the created by. Created date time is always going to come in there. Same with last modified date time. So we're just tracking those, and I at least use them all the time for things around the studio, but I don't have to explicitly create them for each collection. And then ID, obviously, that's how it's referenced. So that's important and deleted. Once it's not really exposed too much yet. It will be one day, but in Builder, you can have this deleted value. If it's empty, your record's live, it's active, but you can have a value of 1, which is kind of like archived, and you can have a value of 2, which is like permanently deleted. So there's different things you can do with that, but I don't need to care about them. If you're creating something quickly, you don't need to care about them at all. They just come with the collection and work. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to create new fields. So like this is projects. Well, I don't need to write projects name because it's projects, but be like the name of the project. And so now that's a field in my list. And then logo or image, it's not always a logo, would be another field. And then long term, I'm going to have excerpt, description. If I had a partner on the project, if the project was sold, there's all these things I want to do. But for the purpose of right now, I'm just going to add those 2 fields, name and image. And then if we need more, when we need more fields, I'll add them later. So now I'm ready. I'm set up with my projects collection. But there's no actual projects in that collection yet. So what I would do to display these, I'm going to use a grid element. I'm just going to stick it in here and I'm going to link it up to that collection. But before I show that, let's actually get some data into the collection. And so before I build this admin section, I should note that there will be some form of this built into builder in the future. It's on the roadmap, and it's actually a pretty high priority compared to a lot of other things. But right now, if you click data collections, I can see my collections. I can add and edit the fields, but I can't actually see the data in here, you know? So there will be something in builder where on this project's, you know, tab or row, maybe it's even in here, just another tab for actual data. You'll be able to click through, see what's in there, click add a new one really quickly. That way you can get test data up and running. But in the meantime, while it's not there, I do a lot of these admins and they're not hard. I mean, I would love to have something that I didn't have to build this for most cases to go quick, but they're pretty straightforward to build. So I might call this admin projects. And you can see it comes in with a darker color there. That's because last time we had modified the page body class, which is default on all pages that you drop onto the canvas. I had added that as one of the, you know, I added a font, I added some size, some background color, some color. So that just inherits it, which is what I want off the bat. But let's start building this out. So for an admin, a lot of times, and if you remember from Wednesday, I do a specific method of building usually where I have a section that's like a big horizontal section and then a centered div, or in this case, it's a left justified, but like a container inside of the section. And then I put my content. And then the next section is always a section with a section class and a container inside of it. For this admin, I don't need to do that because it's just for me. No one else is going to be viewing this. So what I actually usually do is I drop just a div with nothing on it. And I give it a padding of 4 rem. Kind of strange, but that just gives me like some space around so I don't feel crazy looking at it. And then I just drop stuff right in here. So what I'm going to do is basically create a form. That's like what an admin page is. But I have to also create a list of the projects that I can click on one and then open this form. So it's kind of a multi-step thing. So what I'm going to do is just create a list of projects on the left and then a space on the right that when you click on that, that list, it pops open the form on the right. So to set it up, I'm just going to drag a few elements onto the page as kind of like my skeleton, and then I'll add styles to them. So, and actually, I'm just going to keep that outer div unattached. So basically what I have here is my outer div, which I'm not going to touch, and I can just call this like main container or something. And then I have a div here that I'm going to make columns and then my 2 columns. So to make this div columns, I don't need to add any, because I'm in this admin, right? And like I could do this with classes and I probably should in some ways, but I don't need to. I'm just making this quickly. So I come directly into this inline styles. So if you're familiar with how HTML and CSS works, this is literally like on an element in HTML, like style equals and typing them. That's an inline style. It overwrites all other styles kind of thing. And you can't do media query responsive on it, but that's all I need in this case. So I'll just type display grid and then give it my grid template columns, which in this case might even be like this. So what I would have is 1/4 width and 3/4 width. This FR just means fractional width, and the grid template columns can take any amount of columns. Like I can type all these different values into here and it'll make those into columns. So in this case, since I only have 2 values, it's going to take the 2 elements that are directly children of it. This one's going to be 1/4 width and this one's going to be 3/4 width. And that's all I need to do for setup. And what's cool about using grid in this way is then I can change it. You know, if I wanted even half and half, 1 fractional width and 1 fractional width would get me there. So that's half there, and then I can come back on this side and half there. All right, and then so, oh, let me put that back. And then so what I'm gonna do now inside of these actual sections to make the list here and to make the form here, I'm going to create other pages. And this is where the power of Builder kind of comes in and the beauty of this. But I have a page that will represent each row in that list. And what I can do, just make that a little smaller. Whoops. Just put it right over here. That all moved on me. And then on this page, for now, drop a div, drop a text area, which will be the name. And that's all I really need to do. So I have this row page. I'm going to add way more into that in a second. But over here, inside of this left div here, I'm going to drop a grid/list of pages. And in this case, it's going to be a list of this page. So when I drop it on there, there's no page kind of like hooked up to it. I come into the properties here and I can select the row page as admin projects row. And now you can see it's just taking this page and listing it 3 times right there. And what that'll do in a second, I'll link that up to data. So that will actually list however many records are in that projects collection. And then for each record, it's going to use this page, which I'm going to add actions and binding into as well. But before I do, let's drop a page on here for admin projects edit form. And this is the form that actually will have inputs. And this is where we can edit those values. And maybe for this one, my screen is not usually this small. Maybe well, you'll see what'll happen, but I'll keep it down here. And once I put it in here, this page will overlap. No big deal. Similar thing. I'm going to set a div as a container into this form. I don't really need any styles on it because it's coming into this other page. But what I do is for each input, this is something I do personally too, just personal preference. For each input, I'll add a div as like a kind of a container around it. I'll add a label, which is just a text paragraph, and then an input field. So what that does is that just gives me a very quick system to say like, this is the project name, and this is the input for name. And then, oops. And then for the next field, I just copy this div here. Or just, I mean, I can go copy and then paste, or I can just, when I'm selected on the div, I can just duplicate. And it shows up right down here. And then this one might be like, what was the other one? Oh, image. You know, and then for this case, an image, since I'm in here, I can delete this input because I don't need an input. I actually need an image uploader, which is a pre-built thing in Builder. So I pop that in there. And actually, let me just change some of these defaults. So that's basically what that'll look like, and I'll link that up again in a minute. But what'll happen is, so I'll do this just to show you right now. But if I have a component, which is an element that loads another page, and I set the component page to this edit form, now you can kind of see what this admin's looking like. So I select him over here, and I'll load him into here. So the next step, the next logical step will be to take that data from the data collection I made, this projects collection, and just map it to these things. And then, well, actually, you know what I'm going to do first is I need a button to create a new entry. That's the one thing that's missing. So I'll actually stick that like right above this grid, I think. Will make sense. And then this button will be called Add Project. And that, again, similar to the page body, because I have styles on this default button class, which comes to you empty, but because last time I live streamed, I added these styles in, that button comes in styled appropriately for my project. And in the admin, doesn't matter, kind of minor, but it's cool. And I can see also it's butting really close up to this other column. It's because I forgot to put a grid column gap property and just give it a little space in between. All right, so add project now. This is the first time for this admin that I'll jump into the actions. And so what I need to do is create an action when you click this button, it adds an entry into that data collection. And I'll go a little further because I'm going to add an entry in the data collection and then I'm going to open it up into here to edit. But the basics of it is you just need to add that entry into the collection. So every element has properties, styling, events. And then you can go in here and do like, there's so many events you can choose from. But the click event in this case is already here. So if I don't have an action created, I can create it here, new action group, like inline in my flow. Or you can always come to the action group section and just create a new action. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an action for add project. And now in my action group here, I can do one or more steps. So eventually this will be a couple steps, but the first important step is I want to do data create record. And so data create record is the action to add a new record. So the first step is I select my collection. I want to add to projects. And then it gives me the option here to map fields. So if I have a bunch of inputs on a field and I fill them out and then I hit a button to add, I might want to map all those fields so that when it gets added, it saves all those fields to the database, to that record. In this case, it's just a button. I'm not actually, there's no input where I'm typing a name and then hitting add. I'm just hitting add. But I'm going to make it a little bit, I guess, smart. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a default name. So this field mappings, I can map as many fields as I want, but it's going to read the fields from this project collection into this list. So I can choose name. And then here's where I'm coming from an element value. So normally I might choose an element, but in this case, I'm not going to come from an element value. And so just to note, I could come from an element value. I could pull this from a variable. I could pull it from data. I could pull it from all these different things. But I actually just want to type it. So there you go. So I'm just going to choose a text field and I'm going to say new project, which means we're going to create a record in projects. And the name field is going to be pre-filled out as new project. And that's all. And that creates it and saves that new ID into a variable here called new record ID, which I can type whatever name I want for that variable, but I like that default. But that's all it would do. So I could test it now, but I couldn't even show you without refreshing the page. This binding's not linked up, so I couldn't even show you it fully. So I just want to note that's all you need to do to add data entries, but I'm going to do a couple more things just so we can actually see it and work with it better. So the first thing that I'll do is I'm going to create a new action group. Ooh, I don't need to do this with an action group. I can do this with binding. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bind this list to the records so that after I hit this add project and it adds, I can just refresh this binding, refresh this list, and that new project will show up right in that list right away. So in order to do that, there's a little bit of setup, which is just I take this list element, which is the grid list of pages, and I had previously selected the row page on this element. If I'm on here and I come over to this data tab, I can bind this list element to a whole collection. So I select projects. I can tell it to get certain fields if that's all I need, or in this case, I'm just going to do get all fields. And that's all I need to do. You can set more stuff. Like you can actually set this element to be a filtered collection. You can sort it right here. You can limit the number of records. I just want to list all projects though. And eventually I'll probably put a sort in, but for right now, I'll just list these projects. And so that's all I need to do. So if I preview this now, there's no projects in the list, but if I add a project and it adds a record to that collection, there will be something in the list. So what I can do is after this create record, there's a few ways I could do this. One way is I could just nest in a page binding action, which would bind everything on the page just like it does when the page loads. I could also do an element binding, I think. Run bindings for an element, which is a specific action where I can say just run the bindings for this grid list of pages. Maybe I'll even just keep it like that for now. Or there's a whole other thing called data listeners. And the reason I won't do data in a real project, I use data listeners for almost everything that in this scenario, but I can keep it simple for now. Data listeners, what it'll do is it'll listen to a collection. Anytime, any user, whether it's me or anyone else using my app, would add or edit something in that collection, if I have this page open, it'll trigger an action. So it's really cool for keeping things up to date, meaning like say there were two admins on this project and we were both looking at the list of projects. when I add one, that other admin will just see it pop into their list automatically without refreshing. But it also has like even crazier applications. So if you wanted to make a chat application, you use these residence data listeners, and when someone sends a message and it puts it in the database, everyone else, that message will pop in. And then, but yeah, for right now, that's probably just better saved for another day. For right now, I just use this action to manually run the binding on here. And then the other minor detail I toggled this don't wait. I toggled it to wait because it's going to first create the record. I want it to wait until that's done, and then I want to run the bindings on the event. So I think right now that's probably enough to test out. So when the page loads, it's going to look for that whole collection and bind it from here, but it won't find any. When I click add project, it'll add it here, just the name new project, and then it'll run the binding. And so we should see new project in there. The only other thing, something I forget to do almost every time, is I'm going to come to this button and make sure that on click, I actually bind the add project action. A lot of times I create all that, especially if I'm talking about it, like doing it live, create all that, view it, the button's not working. I'm like, what's going on? I just forgot to add it. But if you do come in from the button first, the method I showed first, where you do add new action group here, it'll get auto added. So that's good. And then in order to test this, I do need to give it a URL route. So I've already got a route / in here, which is my home page. So that's how I'm testing this. But I actually I need a new one for, let's say, admin / projects. And you can call it whatever you want, but that's really what I want it to be. If they're unauthenticated, if someone's not signed in to my project, in the future, I would want to redirect them to a sign-in page or something here, right? Because you need to be signed in theory, to edit an admin. But for right now, I didn't create users on my project. I didn't create authentication. So everyone viewing it, including me, is not signed in. So I actually do, in this case, temporarily need to set unauthenticated, and I can set authenticated to both go to admin projects. But in the future, a great way for me to limit this admin to just me is I'll create a very simple auth system. My average users on the site are not going to be allowed to sign up. They won't see any sign up, but I'll create an account for myself. And then if I'm not signed in, I'll just have this redirect away. That way no one can add projects to my website besides me. So yeah, all that to say, admin projects, create the route. And then now that it's created, for one thing, I can come in here and it's in my list if I want to jump right to it, but I can also just type that in up here. And so this is just like a dummy page. It's not loaded into anything, but this right here should work. I'm doing this live, so let's hope. But once I click this, well, it didn't refresh this list. So maybe I will do that with a data listener just because it's what I'm familiar with. But it may have added the project or not, or maybe that binding doesn't work. So what I'll do, just so I don't waste time trial and erroring, and you can do this too, actually, if you ever do anything that saves to a data collection, it's doing a network request. And so if you inspect, come into these dev tools and hit this network tab, everything you do, it only records, when you have it open, but everything you do that has a network request will come in here. So when I click this button, I should see a network request on the side there. And you can see one just popped in here. That's just kind of a session keep alive or something, connection check on the session. So if I click this, I do see this. And you can look at, even without knowing code, you can actually kind of see what some of this stuff is. I mean, you might need to get used to what to drop down. But it looks like this worked. It says new project, and I can actually look and, oh, please authenticate. So it didn't actually save the entry, and the reason is when I showed that original, so I was in this project, I showed these toggles, I unchecked allow non-authenticated create modify, thinking that I would be using a user system. Totally forgot it. I'm not going to have a user system. So I actually need to put that back on, and now it will let me add. And I'll keep this, so you can see when you refresh the page, tons of network requests. So I'll keep this open just to see if it worked this time, but maybe now it will all actually work. We'll see. Clicked it. So now, yeah, I think it worked. It says record save instead of please authenticate. And I can see is new one and the name field new project. So it looks like that did work, but it didn't update the list. Let's see if it updates the list when I refresh. Yep. And so right now that says name. In a second, I'm going to make that actually say the name of the project. But I just wanted to see that it came in, just see that it worked. And then we noticed this run bindings for element, for whatever reason, did not work. So I'm actually just going to delete that. And when I'm on this page, come into this data listeners. It's a complicated system, kind of, for data listeners, but it's really easy to set up. I just go to the action group that I would want to run when something happens. So in this case, I could just run all page binding. That's fine. And then I choose the collection that I want to listen to. So I want to listen to the projects collection. And I want to say, for now, I'll say only on add remove. But I could make it so only if you modify certain fields or leave it blank. So I'll do only on add remove to the projects collection, run the page binding. And now in theory, as we're working through this, if I click add project, that should update. So the next step, if I take this row, it just says name, and I want it to actually say the project name. So similar to how I bound this element of a list to that whole collection, I can come into this name. It can be anything. It can be an input field. It can be a text box. It can be an image. But I come to the element and I come into the data tab. And since it's a single value, it's not letting me bind a collection like the list was. But I can bind a single record value. So I will say it comes from a field, the collection projects, and the field name. And now what's like really the magic of this is that I don't need to worry about which record it is. So I know that this admin projects row is showing up in this collections list, which means that for every row where it loads one of these pages for every row, it's going to give it the context of the record. So it's actually going to give it like a page variable I can use called ID, but it's also going to know behind the scenes which record ID this is for. So if I bind projects collection name, and this is being run in a list of projects, everything just works. And I could actually do this in a couple ways, because I could have this admin projects row as the page for like 3 different lists that are reading from 3 different collections. And so that's why I specify the collection itself and then the field. So you can actually take this and get really custom with it. But for the most part, you don't need to. For the most part, you just select the collection, select the field that you want to show. It's bound now. And so when I refresh this, it'll say new project instead of just name. And that's all I need to bind in this case, because what I'm going to do is when you click new project, I'm going to open it to edit over here. But you can do that, if you have a million things on this page, you could bind a million different things. And that's how you do it. Each one, you just go into that data tab. All right, so now we have that. I'm just going to organize it for my own head. So now we have this. And what I want to do is I want it so when you click on this, it loads this page into here. And you could do it, what I do a lot of times is I have it open a whole new page in the browser, and I use a dynamic URL route, and I do other things like that. In this case, it's so simple that I'm just going to open it into a collection. So in order to do that, I need to first create this action on the little page where I'm clicking. Or actually, let me think. Maybe I'll create it on the reason I pause is because I might actually create the action on this page. So on this admin main projects page, any action I create, I can run it from another page. So what that would do is that would allow me to stay kind of organized, because I'm actually doing the action on this page. And then on this page, when you click, I'll say run action on page and choose this action. So let's do it on this page. And what we'll do is we'll say load edit form. I call that whatever I want. That's just for me. And builder, so again, this is now my action group, load edit form. I can put as many actions as I want. Builder has an action for, forget exactly what it's called. Create an open page in a container. Oh, actually, I'm going to use that. I'll do that in a second for the ad, but for now, I want to do open page in a container. So open page in a container, the first thing I'll do is create the page that I want to open. I want to open this admin projects edit form page that I made down here. And I want to open it into a container on the current page. The container is this component. And then the only part that's tricky here, so if you didn't have data, if you weren't using data, you'd be done. But in my case, I actually do want to send in the ID of the page I'm opening. And so I don't know, I'm doing this live, and this is a little bit of a weird way to do it. I think I have to go like this. So instead of a text straight up, I can do a concatenate field, which lets me combine together like a text string, a variable, a collection, that kind of thing. Oh, you know what I just realized? I don't have the context here. Sorry to go back and forth. I mean, that's kind of real to building, so maybe it's good to show. But I realize I want to send that ID in, and I want to do it easily. So instead of having this load edit form on this main page, if I put this action on this page, I have the context of that ID. It's a little bit easier. So I can do load edit form. And it's almost the same thing, except instead of selecting that container from current page, I select the other page that it's on. So it's really just as easy. So I want to open the projects edit form page, and the container I want to open into, instead of current page, I can select admin projects and then component. And now I can concatenate this page data together. And so this is an example of something that will have a more intuitive UI around it, because if you're new to Builder, you might not understand how to use a JSON string to send in this ID, but that's what it is right now. So what I did was I created a JSON string to pass in as page data. And essentially the JSON string just says ID equals, and then I'm getting from a variable on the current page ID, that will output whatever record I'm on's ID. And that's going back to what I said before, where it has context. Because that page is in this list, because this list is bound to a collection list, it knows the ID of this page, and it has it in a variable called ID. Oh, I see a question. And so the question is the ID similar to when I was trying to generate an ID for new meeting? Yes, but I think that it works. So I was trying to help Alex with this for a long time. I couldn't figure out why it was just like the new page that I was opening up. It was almost the exact same situation, but the new page wasn't getting the ID. In that case, in your case, I think that it should have worked the way we were doing it, and there was a bug. And I think that bug's fixed now. But if I would have, I don't think this is exactly what I'm doing. So if I would have done this method, it potentially would have worked. But I actually think when I was trying it on my own, because I was trying to troubleshoot, I tried this and it didn't work. So that was just like a weird one-off problem. And I forgot to follow up after the new, we made a big UI changes that I thought would fix it. I forgot to follow up. So I should follow up after this and see if it fixed it. But for now, I've done this before where it's worked. So I hopefully this will work in this case. But if not, I'll just try a different method and we'll all learn. So let me see. Load edit form. Looks like it lost that page. Oh, it's all jammed. Oh, whoops. It just wasn't scrolled up. All right, so load edit form. Here's the page. Here's the component I load into. Here's hopefully that data. That should work, but it won't like do anything yet, because this page, I actually have to make it use that data. Now there is a way, and what we were doing, Alex, with yours is like this page would automatically have full context of the data. In this case, I'm not actually doing that. Since I'm only passing that ID in, I'm just gonna, in the beginning of this page when it loads, I'm gonna use that ID and pull the rest of the data as a variable. Although really I shouldn't do that. It would be better to not, to bind these real. So maybe I'll try to do it real, but I actually don't. The reason I don't do that is because it was hard before. It's easy now, but I'm not used to that method. So I'm just using my old methods. So maybe I will just go out on a limb and just try the new way. But in the meantime, let's see if this actually is going to load up any page in here. So when the admin project page starts, I won't load a page into that component. It'll be blank. But then when you click this, so let's say when you click this whole thing, I want to run load edit form. And so even though that won't change based on the current entry, it should load it in. All right, so that part worked. So in here, the problem is I don't fully know how to do it the correct way. Like if I had like a minute to mess around and I thought of this before live stream, I would figure it out quickly, I think, but I don't actually know the best way. It might be in this action even. Oh, whoops. Yeah, I actually don't know the best way to do that. But there is a way, and maybe for next time I'll just explain it. I'll like figure it out, explain it, because maybe it's a little easier. And in fact, if you don't have to write this JSON out, it's probably a lot easier. So in any case, I'm just gonna keep going with this method now because I'm already 40 minutes into this and I want to hopefully wrap this up before it's done. But it would be good. I really should have figured out the more modern way to do that. All right, so my way, I loaded this page into here. And I know that this page has a variable on it now called ID, which is the record ID I clicked on. So I actually just want to like create a variable on this page. I use that ID to create a variable that has all the fields. And right now the only fields that exist are name and image. That's all I created. But I need to see them. So when this page loads, every page that loads runs a page load action and then a page binding action. And so page binding, if I want to rebind stuff like I did up here with that data listener, I can call it again later. Page load, typically you just run it once when the page loads. So I'm going to go into page binding and actually set these variables so that if anything ever runs that page binding action again, it'll re-get the information. Page bindings itself is where it reads all the data tabs you have. So I just leave that there. But let's do a set variable action. And I'm going to set a variable on the current page, and I'm going to call it this project. And it's going to be a variable that contains all the fields for that project. And it's funny because as I'm doing this, I'm realizing this is a much harder way to do it. Like I'm creating hassle for myself. So I'm going to definitely learn the faster way and show it next time. But for this way, and if the faster way didn't work for whatever reason, like with Alex, we had a bug or something, like this way would work as a good workaround. So what I did was I start setting a variable current page called this project, and I'm going to get the actual value of that variable from a data collection. I'm going to get it from projects, and I'm just looking for a specific ID. So I can set this ID field to the variable I just passed through called ID. And so every time that page loads, it gets the ID variable. Then what we do is we create a new variable called this project, and we get it from the projects collection where the ID is that ID. I'm just going to get all fields here, and I don't need to change any of this. So what it's going to give me is it's going to give me a JSON string, which is the project and then the actual field, for each field. So this project dot name, this project dot image, and any other fields I'd make. And then I can do this right in the same action, I guess. I'll do a set value. And I'm going to wait, because first I'm going to get the variable for all the values. Then I'm going to run a series of set values after. So I make sure I wait until that variable is created. But I can set the input name, and I can set it to the variable this project. And so this is actually another tricky thing. These things I don't even think twice about as I'm building normally, but this is like another tricky way because you have to add a 0 in here. No one would know that. So I definitely need to show the better method. But this would be like, actually, I don't even know if I can write name like that. I might even have to write the field ID in there. But let's try this and see if it works. So this would be name, and then I can duplicate this for image. And in this case, I set the value of the image uploader. The image uploader itself knows what to do. It knows that means not display text or not, the value of the input. It knows to be the image uploader value. This is image, runs on page binding, gets that. That should work. So now, all right, it did not work. The reason it did not work is further proof that I need to do this a better way. But I think when I wrote .name, I think I actually have to use the ID. What's kind of cool about Builder, at least for someone like me, is that most of the things you need to do behind the scenes are done with IDs, but all the IDs are exposed. Oh, variable name contains an S. Great catch. Let me try that first. Very great catch. Thank you so much. All right. That's another thing I do like 20 times a day. There's like a little tiny, oh, still didn't work. I need to get the ID. A little tiny discrepancy, and I try a million things and come back like, oh, typo. Same with code. But yeah, that didn't work still. So I do think I need to come in here and get the ID for this field. And so like what I was kind of getting at is when you do need to get in this level, and I'm like, I know that behind the scenes Builder's using ID, and I'm like, how do I get that ID? Almost all the IDs are exposed. So I can come into this name field and just copy that ID and come into this image field, copy that ID. So image was this one and name was that one. It's funny because my multi-paste is just filled with IDs like this because I was just doing something very behind the scenes, right in the weeds. So let's see. All right, so now you can see new project is set in there, so that works. And so that's the initial load. Image is blank because all I did was create a new project. There's nothing that's going to load in there, but that itself just loads them in. And so even further reason to do the better method is I could set, if I was using the more correct method, I could set this input to autosave when it's changed, which means if I change it like that and click out of it, it will just save it automatically. But the way autosave works is with this binding, with this data. Ooh, I do know a shortcut in between where I can make that work, I think. But anyway, I'll show it next time instead of going back and forth and being confusing. But this data, if I would have said it correctly and had the field information in here, that's all this input needs to know how to save it when you click out of it. So there's a built-in event, or action I mean, called autosave. But for now, I'm going to save it manually. And what I'm actually going to do, because this is my own admin and I can be quick, fiends, I can just make an action called save all fields. And in this action, I'll just save every field, whether it's changed or not. And then anytime any input's changed, I can run this action. So to start, let's do update data record. And actually, I don't know if there's a better way to do this now. Like there probably is. But when I edit a field, I manually type this ID in here like this so that it knows which record it's on in the projects. And that's because I have that variable set. Some things, like in certain cases, you can run data update record and you don't need to specify the ID because it'll be in context, it'll know the ID. But I actually don't know which cases work now and which don't, which is just an artifact of using this stuff long before it worked. But so I think I might not need this, but I always put it because it's simple. So I have a field ID that I set to the ID. That way it knows which record it's editing. And then I just map fields that I want to change. So if I want to update the name field, I can take that from an element value, because I'm looking for this input, field input name. And then to get this image field, I can just map another field to image, and I can take the value, the element value of that image uploader will give me like all the correct stuff. You know, it'll upload it first and then give me the file path or whatever. Those are only fields I have in there, so that's all I need to save. And then if you remember, a couple things get saved behind the scenes, like created by date, created by, in this case will be blank. But yeah, that's all it needs to save. So what I can do is on this input, just to test this, I can say when this input's changed, run save all fields. And then on here, if I call this new project 1 and click off, should be saved. I'm just going to refresh to test it. So yeah, it looks like it's saved. Click here, new project 1. Now, if you notice, this name didn't update, which is because that data listener I made, I did it only on add remove, as if I was just adding a project. So I might go back now and change that to be more universal, or maybe only when the name field is changed I could do. It doesn't matter in this case. It's not a big decision, but if you had an app that was very complex, you might not want to do, you might want to actually do separate data listeners for different fields instead of saying any field that gets updated, stuff like that. Most of the time in a small project, I just let it ride. All right, so this took a little longer than I thought. It's already like I got 10 minutes left on the hour, but essentially what I got started here was this list of new projects. So to wrap up, instead of finishing this out, which I plan to do, to wrap up, I'm going to output this on the front end really quick, just to kind of like tie the pieces together for today's live stream. But I clearly needed to go back in and update some details. So what I'll do in the meantime, I'll look into this better method that I referenced. That's a lot more intuitive. And as long as there's nothing crazy to change at this point, or I can't imagine it would be, next time I'll go re-implement this in the more correct way. But to wrap up today, what I actually want to do is come back out of this admin and come back to my main project and start to display those here. So actually, before I do that, let's just make this more real. Actually, do I have an image for that? Let's do yesterday's weather. So call it yesterday's weather, and I'll select the image for the logo. Okay. And so, yeah, now that should all be saved in there. And so if I come back to my project, this active project space here, I want to start listing them. Right now, the center column here is blank, but I dropped that same element that I used in the admin, grid list of rows. Only this time, instead of selecting the admin row page, I'm going to create a new page to use here. That's going to be that tiny little square that has the image and the name. And then in the future, whatever else I want, because actually I started out a little system like Joust List I have a partner on. So there'll be like a partner icon, and letter drop. I had a partner and it was sold. So like little things like that. So there'll be more in these pages, but for now it's just going to be a tiny page. And this would be, let's call it project card. And now here's a good thing to note too. This project card, I don't need the page body class on there. I don't, because it's going to inherit it. So I can actually remove that. And then I'll just put a div in here. And then we'll put an image and a name, a text for the name. And so what I'll do, I won't do this right now just because I want to make sure I finish in time, but I'll usually do some kind of default image and like actually set it in here with the media library. And then maybe like here, I could call it like name. But what actually is going to happen is I'm going to bind these to data so that when they're displayed, they're instantly overridden with real data. And so same as a couple other things we did, come into data. In this case, I'm coming from a record value. And again, like I'm going to bind this list to the projects collection. So each of these pages, I'm going to know it's a project collection. So I come into from field, projects, and then select the field. If I bind this image to the image field, it'll display that. And then if I bind this name to the name field, it'll display the name. And then I just need to take this grid element, choose the page I just created, project card, and then bind that itself to the full collection of projects like that. So here you can see it looks a little bit wild. It's not, in a row like it needs to be, but I fixed that on the grid list of pages. I can fix that by saying, I usually add just like a new utility class. It's called grid. The reason is because I'm using a grid element, but I'm going to put display grid on it. And then I'm going to set the template for the columns, as it's called. I can set, as many columns I want. So there's only one of these that's going to show up. So this barely matters. But if I wanted 4 columns, I might do like this. That would essentially, you can see it over here started. That would give me 4 equal columns. That's what 1FR, 1 fractional width, 1 fractional width, 1 fractional width. If I wanted like 4 columns, but the last one was always 200 pixels, I do something like that. But in this case, I want them all even. And then I want a little bit of space in between them. So I might adjust these values later, but it's basically that. And so you can see over here, it's hard to see those dark images on dark color, but it's kind of in there. And I need to change some styling, but you get the idea. And that is bound, pages in. So now if I test the home page, I think we should see something in there. All right, the image didn't work, but we got yesterday's weather in there. And then Alex is asking, on the main page, am I going to have the not currently live toggle when I stream? If yes, how am I going to do this? Yes. This toggle is the same thing that I showed this for a second on I checked it in the beginning of this, which you might have missed, but I checked my live.workandwhistle.co site because I have this on here, but it didn't work. So I have to fix it. But what this does is this reads the Twitch API. And one of the things you can do with the Twitch API is with my Twitch username, Work and Whistle, it can tell me if I'm live or not. And so this is supposed to be that if I'm live, this turns into like a green button, I think, or I did something different and says like view now. And then if I'm not live, it shows it gray and says Drew is not currently live. So my idea with this one is to do that same thing. What I was going to do is make it into a pattern, pull it over so anyone could use the pattern. But it didn't work, so I have to figure it out first. But yeah, I'll just use that same thing. I wish it worked because I thought I tested it. I thought that it did work, but I must not have. Or maybe I broke it. But anyway, yeah, that's something in Twitch. And it's a perfect example, too, of something like, because I know APIs, it only took me a second to build that. But if you don't know APIs, that'd be such a hassle. And so I'm really excited that that can just be, a block or a pattern or something that you drop in and it just works. So I got 3 minutes on the hour. I'm just going to look and see why this image didn't work, but it's finding that record. It's finding the correct name. So if I had multiple in there, it would list them all. And so I'm well on the way, and then I can continue this next time. But let's first check back in that admin and see if the image shows up in there. No. So what I'll do is on spec, same thing I did before, hit that network tab and change the image. So it looks like it's saved, but so it looks like it's saved, but oh no, I think I just loaded the image. Should have saved. Let me just double check. No big deal. If not, I'll figure it out probably next time. Oh, you know what? This is not the save. This is just saving that image. Oh, I know. I just didn't put a event on here when this is changed to trigger the save. So it's actually really simple. It's another one I just do all the time. Whoops, not autosave. Save all fields. So now, I think that might just work off the bat. Let's find out. Yep, so there's when it uploaded the images. Here's when it saved. And looks to be pretty good. Where am I? There we go. Cool. So yeah, that's it for today, I think. And then there's a lot more detail I'm going to add in these, and I'll fix the admin, and if I have time to start on the maybe the single page viewer of these, maybe we'll see. But I'll just pick up next time. Thanks for watching. Thanks for the questions, Alex. And also, in case I forget, we could revisit that ID thing, especially after I learn the new method and I'm really up on what's current. We can revisit it. So yeah, thanks. I'll be back on Monday with the one caveat that my wife may be in labor, in which case I will not be back on Monday. But we'll see. We're just playing the waiting game right now. All right, thanks.